Imagine being alone in a dark cave at the edge of the world. No noise, no light, just the sound of your own breath and the beating of your heart. You came here on a quest for answers, but now you feel the pressure of something ancient pressing in on your soul. And a presence, not outside of you but inside. Fear, and not the kind of fear that makes you jump at a loud noise. No, this is the deeper kind, the one that silently shapes your identity, your habits, your beliefs. The kind that Carl Jung spent decades trying to understand, and one that most of us never even notice is controlling us. But today we're going to expose it. We're going to confront the 3 things you absolutely must stop doing if you want to reclaim your mind, your spirit, and your life. This isn't just psychology. This is war. A war for your soul. And it begins now.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Carl Jung didn't speak in cliches. He didn't offer comfort. He offered confrontation. He looked into the abyss and said, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." He warned us that fear is not just an emotion. It's a force, a powerful, deceptive force that distorts our perception of reality and keeps us trapped in loops of stagnation, shame, and self-deception. So what are the 3 things we must stop doing? That's what we're about to uncover. But first, we need to understand the nature of fear itself. Fear is not always loud. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides in the form of rationality, of logic, of justification. It convinces you not to speak up because now's not the right time. It tells you not to chase your dream because you need to be realistic. It advises you to stay in that toxic relationship because you've invested too much to leave. You don't call it fear. You call it maturity, responsibility, caution. But underneath all those words is fear wearing a mask. And here's the truth: if you don't recognize it, you can't heal it. The first thing we must stop doing immediately is suppressing our fear. Most of us have been taught that fear is weakness, that showing fear is shameful, that admitting fear means defeat. So what do? We push it down. We numb it with distractions. We pretend we're fine. We slap on a smile, go to work, make small talk, scroll through social media, and convince ourselves that everything is okay. But it's not. Deep down, we're anxious, we're unfulfilled, we're haunted. Carl Jung warned us that what you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. When we suppress fear, we give it power. We turn it into a shadow, and the shadow never dies. It waits, and it controls us from the dark. Ask yourself this: what fear are you pretending not to feel right now? What truth is your body screaming that your mind is too afraid to hear? Maybe it's the fear of not being enough. Maybe it's the fear of being abandoned. Maybe it's the fear of your own greatness. Yes, that's a real fear too. Because stepping into your power means letting go of everything that made you feel safe. And that's terrifying. But here's the paradox. The only way to be free from fear is to feel it, to face it, to let it move through you instead of hiding from it. And that brings us to the second thing you must stop doing: identifying with your fear. This is one of the most dangerous traps of the human psyche. We don't just feel fear, we become it. We say, "I am anxious, I am afraid, I am insecure." But Carl Jung would argue that you are none of those things. You are experiencing them. There's a vast difference. You are not your emotions. You are the space in which emotions arise and pass. The observer, Entsaber, the witness, the self. When you identify with fear, you limit your identity. You shrink your potential. You create a false self that is rooted in avoidance and limitation. Jung would say that fear is a message from the unconscious. It's trying to show you something. Maybe it's pointing to a childhood wound you haven't healed. Maybe it's highlighting a lie you've been telling yourself. Maybe it's challenging you to evolve. But no. But instead of listening, we attach. We say, "This is who I am." And that belief becomes a prison. Your mind becomes a maze of excuses and justifications. You start to live a life that is smaller than your soul. And eventually you forget that there's even a way out. So let me ask you something that might shake you. What decisions are you making that are rooted in fear, but disguised as logic? What parts of your life are based on who you had to become to survive, rather than who were born to be? These questions are not for the faint of heart. But if you're still watching, you're not faint of heart. You're ready. And that brings us to the third and final thing you must stop doing: externalizing the source of your fear. This is the most insidious pattern of all. We think our fear is caused by the outside world, from the economy, our boss, our partner, our parents, our past. But Jung would challenge that. He believed that the external world is a mirror of the internal. That whatever triggers you is pointing to something unresolved within you. So when you say, "I'm afraid because of them," you're giving your power away. You're making yourself a victim, and fear loves that. Because fear only survives where there is disempowerment. Let's take a moment to reflect. Think of the last time you felt afraid. Not scared of physical danger, but emotionally afraid. What was really happening? Was it the situation, or was it the meaning you gave to the situation? The truth is, most of our fear is not about the present moment, but it's about the story we're telling ourselves. If I speak up, I'll be rejected. If I fail, I'll be worthless. If I succeed, they'll leave me. Fear is the storyteller of the ego. But you don't have to keep listening. You can become the author. You can rewrite the narrative. Carl Jung believed that the human being is not here to be comfortable. We are here to become whole. That means facing fear, not escaping it. But that means making the unconscious conscious. That means taking radical responsibility for our inner world. Because when you do, something incredible happens. Fear loses its grip, not because it disappears, but because it's no longer running the show. You start to feel it without being controlled by it. You start to use it as fuel, as guidance, as a compass pointing you toward your next evolution. And here's the deeper truth most people don't want to admit: fear is sacred. It's a teacher. It's a gateway. Jung knew this. He saw fear as a threshold. Behind every fear is a part of you that is asking to be integrated. A truth that is asking to be revealed. A gift that is waiting to be unwrapped. But you have to go through it. You have to choose courage over comfort, truth over illusion. You have to stop waiting for the world to change and start changing from within. So let's bring it all together. If you want to break free from the unconscious chains of fear, stop doing these three things. Stop suppressing it. Feel it instead. Breathe into it. Let it rise and fall like a wave. Stop identifying with it. You are not your fear. You are the one observing it. And stop blaming the outside. Turn inward. Own your story. Rewrite the script. Because when you do, you don't just change your life, you change the world. Imagine a world where more people were doing this, where fear wasn't avoided but understood, where people stopped projecting their wounds and started healing them, where courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. That world isn't a fantasy. It's a possibility. And it starts with you. So I'll leave you with this question. Not to answer with your mind, but with your life. What would your life look like if fear were no longer your master? You've already made it further than most people ever will. You've crossed that invisible threshold, the one between knowing and doing, between theory and transformation. And now it's time to go deeper, not into fear itself, but into the engine that keeps fear alive in our lives. Carl Jung didn't just study fear as an emotion, he saw it as a psychic force, a shaping presence in our unconscious, a master of disguise that takes the form of logic, morality, and even love. He warned that fear has the power to distort the psyche and trap us in illusions that look like truths. So if we truly want to break free, we must not only recognize fear, we must dismantle the inner machinery that keeps it in control. And that begins with the first lie fear tells us, that it's protecting us, and that it's keeping us safe. That if we just listen to it, obey it, everything will be okay. But that's not safety. That's stagnation disguised as security. That's paralysis dressed up as wisdom. And the longer we believe that lie, the more we shrink. We shrink our voice, our choices, our presence in the world. Not because we want to, but because we've been conditioned to believe that avoiding fear is the same as avoiding danger. But it's not. Avoiding fear is avoiding life. Carl Jung understood that fear is not a surface-level reaction. It is rooted deep in the structure of the psyche. It's part of the primal architecture of the human mind. But in the modern world, where most of us are no longer running from predators or surviving famine, our fear has mutated. It no longer protects us from physical threats, it protects us from emotional risk, from spiritual evolution, from the vulnerability of being seen as we truly are. And so we become masters at hiding not just from others, but from ourselves. We hide behind perfectionism, behind busyness, behind intellect, behind humor. We wear masks so long we forget they're masks. We perform identities that fear told us were safer than authenticity. And then we wonder why we feel disconnected, anxious, unfulfilled. But Jung would say that this disconnection is not the disease, it is the symptom. The disease is fear that has been left unexamined, unchallenged, and untransformed. The cure is not courage in the way most people imagine it. It's not charging forward, sword raised, pretending you aren't afraid. It's turning inward. It's sitting in silence. It's listening to the parts of you that haven't spoken in years. The parts that are still frozen in time, still holding on to experiences that your conscious mind can't even remember. And that's the true danger of fear. It doesn't just live in your thoughts. It lives in your body, in your nervous system, in your breath, in your posture. And until you bring it into the light of awareness, it will continue to run your life in the background. So what does it look like to face fear on this level? Not just intellectually, but somatically, spiritually, archetypally. It begins with presence, radical, embodied presence. Not the kind of presence you perform at a mindfulness retreat. The kind of presence that feels like standing naked in front of a mirror and refusing to look away. The kind of presence that doesn't flinch when memories rise, when shame screams, when your ego tries to drag you back into comfort. Jung would call this process individuation, the journey of becoming whole. Not perfect, whole. That means integrating the parts of you that fear told you were unacceptable. Your anger, your grief, your jealousy, your ambition, your wildness, your sensuality, your rage, your hunger, everything that fear told you to suppress in order to be loved, accepted, and safe. But here's the paradox: the more you suppress, the more fragmented you become. And the more fragmented you are, the more power fear has. Because fear thrives in fragmentation, in isolation, in separation. But when you begin to reclaim those parts, when you say, yes, this is also me, you begin to take your power back. Think about this. Every part of you that fear convinced you to hide is a part of you that holds energy, creative energy, sexual energy, spiritual energy. When you suppress those parts, that energy doesn't disappear, it gets twisted. It becomes anxiety, compulsion, depression, addiction, self-sabotage. But when you integrate those parts, when you bring them back into the circle of your being, that energy returns to you. You become more alive, more powerful, more grounded, and fear begins to shift. It no longer feels like a predator, but it feels like a signal, a messenger, a guide, because that's what it was always meant to be. Let's go further. Jung believed that fear often emerges most strongly when we are on the edge of transformation. Just before the breakthrough, the ego panics. It senses its own death. It senses that something deeper is waking up within us, but something that cannot be controlled, domesticated, or manipulated. The self, the true self. And the ego is terrified of the self. Because the self doesn't care about safety. It cares about truth. It cares about growth. It cares about wholeness. So the ego fights back. It floods you with fear. It whispers that you're not ready, that you're not worthy, that you'll be abandoned, humiliated, destroyed. And if you believe it, you shrink back into the small self, into the familiar identity, into the illusion of control. But if you breathe, if you pause, if you hold your ground in the face of that fear, something miraculous happens. The fear begins to dissolve. Not because it's gone, but because you've changed your relationship to it. You've stopped worshipping it. You've stopped obeying it. You've stopped identifying with it. And that shift, subtle as it may seem, is the beginning of liberation. Let me ask you a question that might stop you in your tracks. What would you have to let go of in order to be free from fear? Not just fear of failure, but fear of success. Not just fear of pain, but fear of joy. Not just fear of judgment, but fear of visibility. What would you have to surrender? What old identity? What belief? What loyalty to the past? And are you willing to let it go, even if it means stepping into the unknown, into a version of yourself that you cannot yet fully comprehend? Because that is what fear ultimately guards, the unknown. And the unknown is terrifying only to the ego. To the self, the unknown is sacred. It is the womb of all creation. It is the source of all possibility. But you cannot access it while clinging to certainty, clinging to control, clinging to fear. You must surrender, not in defeat, but in devotion. Devotion to truth, devotion to growth, devotion to the life that is trying to live itself through you. And so we return to Jung's warning. He didn't warn us to avoid fear. He warned us to stop letting it rule us unconsciously, to stop projecting it onto others, to stop building our lives around avoiding it. Because fear that is unconscious becomes fate. It shapes your choices, your relationships, your destiny. But fear that is conscious becomes fuel. It becomes illumination. It becomes a path. So, if you're still here, if you've made it this far, you already know what you need to do. Not in some dramatic, performative way, but in the quiet moments. The moments when fear rises and you choose to stay, to breathe, to stay with yourself, to stay with the sensation, but to stay with the truth. That is what changes everything. That is what breaks the illusion. That is what alchemizes fear into freedom. Are you ready to stop giving fear your identity? To stop building your life around what you want to avoid? To be who you already are? Because if you are, then the next step is not out there. It's right here, inside you, waiting. Now we're entering the final stretch, not a conclusion, but a revelation. What you're about to hear is not just philosophy, and it's not just psychology, but it's a remembering of who you were before fear taught you to forget. Carl Jung didn't just study the mind, he ventured into the soul. He understood that the human being is not merely a rational creature trying to survive, but a mythic being on a quest toward wholeness. And fear. Fear is the dragon at the gate, not to be slain, but understood, not to be avoided, but integrated. And if you've made it this far, then you are on that quest. You've already begun the journey into the unconscious, and what's waiting for you now is not more fear, but the treasure it's been protecting all along. Let's be honest with ourselves. Most people live their entire lives never truly confronting the real fear. They wrestle with surface anxieties, chase distractions, numb with substances, and call it living. But deep down, there's a knowing, a whisper in the quiet moments, a voice that says, "This isn't it." That voice is not trying to shame you, it's trying to awaken you. And that awakening begins when you recognize that fear is not the enemy. Fear is the invitation. An invitation to stop living on autopilot, and to stop outsourcing your power. To stop holding back the truth of who you are because it might make others uncomfortable. Jung warned us that the greatest danger is not fear itself, it's unconsciousness. Because what remains unconscious controls us. And fear, when left in the unconscious, becomes a god. A false god that we worship through our decisions, our compromises, our silence. But what happens when we bring it into consciousness? When we say, "Yes, I see you, I feel you, and I'm not running anymore," everything changes. Your nervous system begins to recalibrate, your perception begins to shift. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop shrinking and start expanding. The fear doesn't vanish, it transforms. It becomes data. It becomes insight. It becomes an ally. And then you realize something extraordinary. The fear was never about the thing you thought it was. It wasn't about speaking on stage, or quitting your job, or ending that relationship. It was about what those things represented: invisibility, vulnerability, surrender, change. Fear disguises itself as a reaction to external events, but it's always about internal thresholds. It's the psyche saying, if you cross this line, you'll have to become more of who you really are. Are you ready for that? Let's ask a deeper question now, one that goes beyond the individual. What happens to a society that is ruled by unconscious fear? Look around. We see polarization, violence, manipulation, addiction, despair. These are not just social issues, they are symptoms of collective fear. Fear of the other, fear of loss, fear of being wrong, fear of change. Jung warned that if individuals do not face their own darkness, the collective will act it out. And that's what we're seeing. Mass projection, mass avoidance, mass fragmentation. So when you do this work, when you face your fear, when you integrate your shadow, you're not just healing yourself. You're contributing to the healing of the whole. You become what Jung called an individuated being. A person who is no longer controlled by the unconscious, but guided by the self. And the self is not afraid. But the path to the self is not comfortable. It requires what Jung called holding the tension of the opposites. That means allowing fear and courage to coexist, allowing doubt and trust to dance, allowing death and rebirth to happen inside you again and again. Most people can't tolerate that tension. They want a quick fix, a resolution, a side to pick. But individuation is not about picking sides, it's about integration. And integration is a lifelong path. It means sitting with fear, not once, but every time it arises, and asking, what part of me is emerging now? What truth have I been avoiding? What power have I not yet claimed? You begin to see fear as a signal of expansion. You begin to expect it, not dread it. You begin to welcome it like a teacher who always arrives right before the next level of your evolution. But here's the catch: fear will often use your deepest wounds to get your attention. It will whisper through trauma. It will echo through rejection. It will speak in the voice of your inner critic. And if you meet it with judgment, you'll reinforce the very patterns you're trying to break. But if you meet it with compassion, real, fierce compassion, something miraculous happens. The wound becomes wisdom. The trigger becomes truth. The fear becomes fuel. Think about the moments in your life where you grew the most. The moments that changed you, that broke you open, that humbled you. Were they easy? Were they comfortable? Likely not. They were moments of fear. But you moved through them. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not gracefully, but you did. And that's the proof that you're more powerful than your fear. Not because you don't feel it, but because you felt it and chosen to keep going anyway. That's courage. Not the absence of fear, but action in the presence of it. So let me ask you again, what would your life look like on the other side of fear? Not the absence of fear, but the absence of submission to it. What conversations would you have? What art would you create? What decisions would you finally make? What parts of yourself would you allow to be seen, heard, embraced? Imagine walking through life not needing to hide, to prove, to defend. Imagine waking up and feeling clear, aligned, awake. That's not a fantasy. That's your birthright, but you have to claim it, not by force, not by pretending, but by presence, by honesty, by choosing to stop doing what fear demands and start doing what your soul desires. And that's the real warning Jung gave us. That fear, left unexamined, becomes destiny. That the unlived life becomes a haunting. That the shadow, when ignored, becomes a monster, but when faced, becomes a guide. So today, right now, this moment, you have a choice. To keep living a life that fear built, or to start building a life that truth calls you into. One is familiar, the other is unknown. but only one leads to your wholeness. So what will it be? Because your fear has already told you what not to do. Now it's time to listen to what your freedom is asking of you.